Hirschman, Nikon ambassador and filmmaker. I'm going to take you behind the scenes on my latest short film, shot entirely with the Nikon Z6 II. So the goal of this project was to use the Nikon Z6 II mirrorless camera for video. So I wrote a fantasy screenplay that involved these two characters interacting with each other without talking to each other. This forced us to use, different things like body language and dancing, along with dramatic lighting and camera angles, all to convey our message and mood. We're getting ready to shoot this really long hallway in the sequence with our performer. He's warming up right now, as you can see. As you can tell, it's pretty dark. This is a nighttime scene, and this is lit with these bulbs, and we have control of each one, and we're gonna have some real fun programming each light on and off to kind of play along with our actors. But this is really going to test out our low light capabilities. So the beginning of our film starts in a Victorian era. You could tell with the costumes and the decorations. And I wanted the viewer to think that that's where we were gonna stay. And then the film jumps into a more futuristic era and a completely different mood. We use different lighting and textures. This whole story is about contrast. Using a 14 to 30 f4 lens. This is gonna give us some really wide perspective in a very small room. It'll be pretty interesting to do basically a 360 view all the way around this room. I'm gonna try to play with some different silhouettes. The thing that's unique about this shot is we've decided to turn our camera vertical. We're just trying to do something new, play with some new ideas. What we're doing now is we're doing this dolly shot where our talent sits on one end and our camera is fixed on this, and they travel together. All right, and lights, react, okay, and move. Perfect. The Nikon Z6 II worked awesome through every scenario we put it through. Whether we were tracking a subject in motion on a gimbal or shooting in very low light conditions, this camera just worked excellently. And cut. I'm so happy and so thrilled that Nikon has these mirrorless cameras that you can shoot high quality photo and video on using the same camera body and lenses to shoot both photo and video. That's the best of both worlds. I think this video is a great testament to just how well the camera features work on the Nikon Z6 II. So I hope you enjoyed the film as much as me and my friends enjoyed making it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joe McNally, Nikon ambassador. We're working today with the next generation of Z cameras, mirrorless cameras in the Nikon system. We're working with the Z7 II. We have wonderful talent and a wonderful location. Reason being, this camera is a whole new generation of possibilities. It's got super color, so we have gowns that are just amazing to look at. It's got 2 card slots, so I can shoot all day, okay? We've got improved AF. We have a resolution and detail with this camera that's just, choose through the scenery. Hence, look at all around. We have all this patina and grit and crumble. The camera's gonna love that. And in front of it, we're gonna place all this magnificent color. It's gonna be a great day out in the field with the Z7 II. Once again, just something you threw on. First thing you saw in your closet. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. You just looked at the camera and threw the dress and gave me a killer smile. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So in this setup alone, I've gone full frame, horizontal, vertical. I've gone square format, and now I'm shooting 16:9, which is a more of a cinematic kind of panorama because this entire wall is filled with this vegetation. So I'm going across in a horizontal fashion, but I'm filling everything right to the edges of the frame with all this beautiful detail. In your head, it's just highly improbable, almost like a doll on a shelf, That's it. That's the one.
That's pretty cool.
Wonderful day in the field, okay? Exciting day in the field. And that's, an amazing thing for me to say, honestly, because I've been doing this professionally for 40 years. So to retain the positivity and energy, okay, I gotta keep doing new stuff. I gotta keep seeing new things. And the new Z7 II has given me that today. Color, resolution, detail, new lenses. This just keeps enlarging possibilities. I can't tell you how much energy was brought to bear in the field today, okay? We had a great crew, great talent, great location, and a great camera. And that's where you want to be, okay? That's the best part of doing this, is the excitement and energy when you put your eye into that lens.
My name is Michael Fahon. I'm a Toronto-based photographer. I shoot portraits and weddings all year round, both in the studio and on location. I'm a silent observer. It's so important for me to capture candid, intimate moments of the couple without drawing attention to myself or getting in the way. The ability to shoot silently ensures that I can do that. Every amazing couple is open to enjoy their perfect day. My job is to capture those moments for them to always cherish. With the Nikon Z6 II having 2 card slots, I can be rest assured that every photo is backed up. I'm always looking for creative angles, and the tilting screen lets me shoot high or low while still keeping my subject perfectly in sight. As the day turns to night, the Nikon Z6 II is so ready. Not only does the full frame sensor provide some amazing low light image quality, but it can accurately focus in much lower light levels than ever before. The emotions of a wedding day play around with your perception of time. It speeds up and slows down, but my job is always the same. I need to capture these moments of excitement and love in seconds. The Nikon Z6 II checks all the boxes to ensure I make that happen.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Chris Ogonek. I'm the product and training manager here at Nikon Canada, and both Nikon and Vistek are coming together today to bring you this really fun online event. We've done a couple of them already with Vistek, so let's just keep going on and keep getting you guys engaged and being able to answer any questions that you might have, because that's pretty much what today is about. Today is about answering your questions. Now, I am going to start off today with a very small presentation, as I put in the chat that you guys can see. I'm going to start off with a small presentation. It's probably going to be about 15-20 minutes long, and it's going to be just basic tips on exposure and autofocus for how to kind of give you a good starting place for your birding and wildlife shooting. Because I don't know where all of you are watching from, but here in Ontario, the weather just got absolutely gorgeous the last couple of days. So it's really good. No rain. Well, I think they're calling for rain the next couple of days, but until it comes, could be a really good time to get out and go and do some shooting. So that's going to be some quick tips on that. But after I finish the presentation, whether you have questions about Nikon gear, something you already own, something you're curious about buying, you can go and throw that in the chat and I'll get to it as an answer. If you want questions about what I talked about with birding and wildlife, feel free to throw them in the chat. But to be totally honest, I'm here to talk about anything. If you want to talk about landscape techniques, macro techniques, you name it, we are here for you. And I say we because it's not just myself. We also do have a few other people from Nikon. I've got Jacob in my ear, so I will probably be having him throw any links down below. So if anybody is asking questions and wanting a particular link that we can go and provide, Jacob will be throwing that in. And we also have Nathan Wilkinson as well. Nathan is one of our sales and NPS reps. He is standing by to answer any questions if I don't get to it quick enough, or if there's some more deep diving research that I want him to do. But it's not just Nikon people who are here. We also have people from Vistek as well. So if you have specific questions, either to your Vistek rep, if like Dan's already jumped on and said hi, if you have a specific rep that you already talked to that you prefer dealing with, then you can go and throw out their name, see if they're here. But you can also just ask any other Vistek related questions to the people who are online. So big shout out to all of the Vistek people. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. So let's kind of start talking about this birding and wildlife tips that I'm going to start with. So what I really want to focus on is kind of understanding the camera and understanding your setups before you even leave the house. And the reason why I want to kind of make that distinction is a lot of the times people decide, okay, I'm going to go shooting, and while they're out shooting, they go and try different modes. They try different autofocus modes, they try different exposure modes without necessarily really fully understanding of what's going on. And I got to tell you, when you try and learn the second that you're trying to, let's say, see something the first time or play with it the first time, it's very difficult to kind of get everything the way you want it. So what I highly recommend is before you even leave the house, try and have a few of the basics down so you kind of really kind of know where you want to go. And from there, then you can build and maybe tweak a little bit of the smaller settings. So there's the stuff you can tweak when you're out in the field, but there's the underlying basics that I'm going to try and give you today. Oh, and we don't only have Dan, we also have Alex. Hello, Alex. Okay, so when we're setting up our camera, we don't always just deal with stationary subjects. A lot of the time, especially when it's birding and wildlife, we're going to be dealing with moving subjects as well. So I'm going to give you a few of my recommendations. Now, keeping in mind, they're just recommendations. They're the way I shoot myself with pretty much all of these things that I'll talk about today, but it's a lot of what I see other people doing, whether it's our ambassadors when I talk to them or other pros in the field. So they're just recommendations. Every single person has a slightly different way of doing it. So just because you're doing something different doesn't mean that it's wrong, that what you're doing is wrong or what I'm doing is wrong. It's just different ways of doing it. Okay, so the two main things I'm going to be talking about are choosing your exposure mode and choosing your autofocus mode, your autofocus points, the way you activate autofocus. I'll go through all of that. So when it comes to your autofocus or your exposure mode, you have four main ones. Obviously, there's scene modes as well, but auto, programmed auto, the big P, aperture priority and shutter priority, and then full manual. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to say full manual, I probably wouldn't recommend. That's not to say that people can't do it, but as I don't recommend it, especially when you're just starting out. Now, if you do notice that asterisk there, there is a reason why that asterisk is there, because there are some settings you can use that really kind of give you most of the control of the camera while you still giving the kind of final decision to the camera. So I'll talk about that little asterisk in just a second. But auto mode, I highly recommend to not use. If you're in a pinch and you just need to get any old shot, then if you have a scene mode, you can go and put it into sport mode. Sport mode's probably the best of the auto modes, just because it's going to try and give you the fastest shutter speed, which is usually what we want for fast moving subject matter. Now, programmed auto, it isn't too bad. Shutter priority, it's okay, but my favorite option is either going to be aperture priority, and you essentially are going to set your aperture, which most of the time, if you're using a long lens, you're going to be wanting to shoot wide open anyway. So you're going to want f5.6, f8 if you're shooting with a teleconverter, and that essentially tells the camera, I want you to shoot fully wide open. And then the camera can go and shoot, can go and choose the shutter speed. Now, here's the first real big tip that I'll talk about. Yes, you can go and have the camera choose the shutter speed all by itself, but when you combine it with auto ISO, it really makes it powerful. So what we're able to do here is I'm going to quickly turn on my second camera, and I'm going to go into the photo shooting menu, and I'm going to go up to the ISO sensitivity setting. Now, in the ISO sensitivity setting, you're going to go and turn on auto ISO. Now, within auto ISO, you have a few different options. Obviously, you can go and tell it the maximum sensitivity to go and use. That depends on the camera you're using. That depends on how picky you are with the image quality that comes out of the camera. So you can kind of judge for yourself depending on what camera you're using. But minimum shutter speed. This is where it really kind of comes into its own, because you can go and select auto. Now, auto essentially just goes and uses the rule of thumb where you take your focal length, take the inverse of it. So if you're at, let's say you're using a 500 millimeter lens, well, 1/500th of a second is going to be your shutter speed, so that you, the photographer, don't want to go and introduce blur. Okay, well, that works. But for moving subject matter, generally, you're going to want much faster shutter speeds than what that rule of thumb is. So we don't have just the auto feature. You can actually go and select any of these shutter speeds to go and tell the camera, you've told it the aperture to use. You've also, by selecting, let's say we're shooting really fast moving birds with very, very, very fast flapping wings. So let's say I'm at 1/3200th of a second. So I've now told it the shutter speed to use, the aperture to use, and it's automatically going to figure out the ISO. So it's going to ramp up and down your ISO to get the right exposure. So aperture priority for me is kind of the best way to do that. Now, what did I just say though? I just said you're picking the shutter speed, the aperture, and you're letting the camera do the work with ISO. Well, wait a second, full manual. If I go and use full manual, select the aperture, select the shutter speed, and then go and turn on auto ISO, is there a big difference there? And the answer is no. So if you're utilizing the auto ISO feature, which I personally like, I know that it gives up a little bit of control, and with certain subject matter, you want a little bit more control. I get it, and there's ways to get around it. But for a general recommendation, that auto ISO feature gives you the ability to shoot an aperture priority or full manual without having to kind of have that, oh my God feeling, because you're having to deal with shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, and focus at the same time, and compose. So it really kind of takes a little bit off your plate and lets you worry about actually capturing the action while being able to tell the camera your main settings that you want it turned to. Okay, so that's the big recommendation for exposure mode. That is to go and select either aperture priority or full manual, but for both of those, go and use auto ISO. Now, when it comes to using your autofocus, the first thing that I would really want to talk about is the AF mode. So you have three different options. You have AFS, AFC, and AFA. So AFS, that is essentially if you're dealing with non-moving subject matter. So if you're using the shutter on the front of the camera, you press and hold down halfway, and the camera will, as long as you hold that shutter down halfway, the camera will continue to lock that focus at that distance. So if, let's say, there's a bird on a perch, you can go and focus and then recompose the camera anywhere you want because that focus distance is locked in there. Now, that works really, really well because it allows you to focus and recompose, but only for moving subjects. A lot of the time when we're dealing with wildlife, your subject is not moving. So my first thing is to not use AFS and to not use AFA, because AFA tries to be the best of both worlds, where it tries to keep the focus like in AFS mode when your subject isn't moving, but it'll go and switch to AFC mode when your subject does move. Okay, well, the best of both worlds. Why wouldn't I go and use that? Well, you can, but it gives up for me a little bit too much control. Personally, I don't know exactly when that camera is going to decide when the bird is on the perch and when it decides to spread its wings and jump, or well, not jump, fly. When is the camera going to make the switch between AFS and AFC? We don't necessarily know. It's going to do it relatively quickly, especially on some of the newer cameras like D500, D850, the Z6 II, Z7 II. It'll do it relatively quickly, but I don't have that control. I want to be able to tell the camera exactly when I want it to trigger that continuous autofocus. So I highly recommend to not use AFA if you're using one of our lower end cameras. AFS, obviously, I don't recommend either because you don't want to be stuck in a mode that doesn't track your subject if they suddenly start, let's say, running towards you or away from you. So my number one option is AFC mode. I don't think that's going to come as a surprise to pretty much anybody, but AFC really, really helps you out in making sure that you're always ready for the action. Now, to take AFC mode just a little bit further, back button autofocus is really what I would recommend for a lot of people when they go and shoot when they go and shoot a mixture of both stills and moving subject matter. If you are only ever shooting landscapes, okay, no problem. You can go and use the front shutter button to activate the autofocus and have no problem whatsoever with it. But if you're ever dealing with little puppies, well, not even little puppies, any household animals, dogs, cats, if you have any little, I'll group them under the household animals. If you have any kids at home, because they're usually dirtier than your puppy or your kitten. If you have any kids, you know that they'll be standing still 1 minute and then they'll go do something super, super cute. And if you're in one mode, then you don't have the most flexibility. And that is where back button autofocus comes in and really plays a part. Now, I know back button AF is I'll say, kind of divisive subject where not everybody not everybody understands how important it can be, or some people just have a totally different technique that works for them. If anybody knows Brad Hill is out in the Calgary, British Columbia area. Amazing wildlife photographer, absolutely spectacular. He doesn't touch back button autofocus with a 10-foot pole. He actually doesn't recommend it to people. But the key here is he always, always, always moves his autofocus point. So his autofocus point is never smack dab in the middle of a frame, which for the majority of people out there, they always keep their autofocus point in the middle and then will recompose their shot. So they're a focus first and then compose, whereas Brad is a compose first and then move the autofocus point to that location. There's a very, very big difference between those two different shooting techniques. The moving your autofocus point wherever you want it is very, very powerful. But for people just getting started, or even people, even regular people who've been shooting for a decent chunk of time, it it takes a lot of effort on your part to be comfortable with that. So while the results can be spectacular, there's a way more effort that really goes into it. Whereas when you have back button autofocus, this example here that I'm going to show you, I was going and shooting this I was shooting this cheetah, and it was lying down, hadn't moved in about 45 minutes. So if I was shooting regular front button focus and I was in AFS mode because I wanted to focus and recompose, and I'm usually one of those people who keeps their autofocus point relatively in the center, what would have happened when in about 3.5 seconds time, that cheetah went from, oh, I'm being lazy, not a care in the world, to there's something I want. And in that 3.5 seconds, it got up and it just absolutely took off. So if I had been in AFS mode, going and recomposing and shooting as I want, and I had to switch to AFC to go and capture it as it went and made this kill, then to be totally honest, I would have missed that entire sequence. I would not have been ready in time. So it isn't always required, and it definitely does take some retraining of your brain to go and be comfortable with back button autofocus. Because I will tell you, there is some uncomfortableness that you will be going through. If you've been shooting for 5 years, 10 years with your front shutter button, then it is definitely going to take some getting used to. But the big benefit of back button AF is I am always in AFC mode, always. Always, always, always. I don't care what I'm shooting, landscapes, portraits, kids, pets, dogs, cheetahs. I'm always in AFC mode. Well, hold on a second. How does that work? Well, because you've essentially decoupled the shutter button and the back autofocus button, the front button is only taking pictures. The back button is only activating your autofocus. That means that when I go and focus on that cheetah that's lying down, I can focus, 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 and it's just lying down, it's not doing anything. When I want to stop autofocusing and recompose, all I do is get off the back AF button. And now, because there's nothing triggering the autofocus, the camera is essentially in AFS mode. Okay, but then the cheetah gets up and chases after that little impala. I now lay in on the AFC button in the back, and I'm instantly in AFC and tracking my subject. So I get the best of both worlds, AFS and AFC mode, all with that back button autofocus. So that's a really, really good thing that I would recommend to people. It is going to take some time. It's going to take days. It could take weeks, but definitely go out and try it, because if you're dealing with moving and non-moving subject matter, that kind of jumping back and forth between those two different positions all the time, being able to easily activate or deactivate your autofocus without having to worry about your composition, because there's no autofocus being triggered by the shutter button, it's really, really powerful. So I would highly recommend try back button AF. It isn't always something that everybody's going to be super happy with. Now, I will kind of go through very quickly and show you how to decouple the front shutter button so that it is not activating autofocus. So on most of our cameras, the majority of our cameras, at least all of our full frame cameras for sure, they have a dedicated AF on button on the back. So that's the menus that I'll be showing you in a second. You do have some cameras, let's say our D5600 is one, which has an AFL AEL. So it's a button on the back labeled AF, AEAF, and you can go and map that button to be your dedicated AF on button. I don't unfortunately have one of those hooked up, so I can't show you, but it's very, very easy to do. So I'm going and showing you on a Z7 II. The buttons, or the exact number of the menus, will be a little bit different between cameras, but you'll always be going into the custom setting menu, the little pencil, go to A for autofocus, and then here it's set A6. And I think that jumps around between A5, A6, A7. So it does depend a little bit on your camera, but you're always just going to look for AF activation. And you can tell that my camera's already set up that way. You go set it to AF on only. out of the box, the camera is going to be set up to shutter/AF on. But you want to go and set it to AF on only. This means that the camera will only be triggering autofocus through that back AF button. So very, very key that you go and set that menu option that I just showed you on your camera. And Edwina, you say thank you so much for having the YouTube as an option. You found the event on Eventbrite. But yes, here we are, and thanks for joining us. Really hope you enjoy the next few minutes, and make sure you throw your questions in the comments below if you have any for me about birding, about wildlife, about Nikon products. Just as a little sales plug, just to let everybody know, we do have some really amazing sales on a lot of our products right now. Whether you're looking for DSLRs, we have the D780 on sale, we have the D850 on sale. The D850, I think, is $500 off, whether you buy the body or the kit only. We have all of our mirrorless products on sale. Literally every single mirrorless body. We have the Z50, the Z5, the Z6, the Z7, the Z6 II, and the Z7 II. So every single mirrorless body that we currently sell, it is on sale. And then whether you're looking for DSLR glass or Z mirrorless glass, we have those as well. So there's a lot of really good savings. So just as a small little mid-event tip, if you guys are curious, the cameras, the bodies and the lenses are going to be on sale for a little bit of extra time, but make sure you go and ask your Vistek rep if there's a particular product that you are looking for. You can either jump onto their website and have a look, or we not only have we not only have Alex and Dan, but Mark and Donovan are online as well. So we have a lot of Vistek reps available. So if you guys do have any questions about gear, something that maybe you're looking to purchase, they're all here to help out. Okay, so we've talked about the exposure mode. We've talked about the AF mode and how to maybe save yourself a little bit of jumping back and forth between AF modes by using back button autofocus. Now let's go and talk about the how you're going to actually select those autofocus points and some of the recommendations that I'm going to make. Now, because we do have DSLR and mirrorless cameras, there is some overlap in terms of how the autofocus modes work, and I will kind of go through some of them. But as you can see up on the screen right now, there's a lot of different autofocus options in terms of every single let's say AF, the number of AF points within every single level within our system. So we have different autofocus points for the Z50 versus the D5000 versus the D6. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these. I'm leaving this up for a few minutes just so you guys kind of familiarize yourself, see which let's say camera you have or which camera you're thinking about buying, just so you can see whether it's the dedicated DSLR autofocus that we have, or if it's the new hybrid autofocus points with a combination of phase detect, that's phase as in PHASE, not face, phase detect and contrast detect hybrid AF points for all of our Z mirrorless bodies. Okay. So Alex, you're asking, do you also use a sub-selector for focus? I put single point on the AF on button and D9 on the sub-selector. If the subject starts moving, then you jump to D9. Okay, so that's actually a fantastic point. So I believe, Alex, if I'm correct here, I think you're actually shooting on a D850. So I wasn't going to bring this up, but because Alex asked me about it, I am going to bring it up because it is a really good thing to talk about. But if anybody's not shooting with either a D500, a D850, a D5, or a D6, those are the only 4 cameras that have this special mode that I'm about to talk about. If you don't have those cameras, I apologize. Blame Alex. Alex, he's the one who put me down this path. Okay, so what it is I'm going to do and what it is that Alex is talking about is the great thing about these cameras is I'm back button autofocusing on the back with the AF on button. Okay, and I obviously have it set to, let's say, single point AF. Okay, well, that works. But what happens if I'm jumping back and forth between, let's say I like single point to be really specific for my landscapes, but at the same time, I might be out in the field and want to quickly jump over to dynamic or 3D autofocusing. Well, you have to waste time, and by time I mean you push the button and rotate the dial, but in some situations you might actually be too slow in doing that when you want to very quickly jump between AF modes. So the D850, D500, D5, D6, and yes, Alex is on a D850. They enable you to customize some of the buttons on the camera to basically be alternate AF on buttons. But not only that, it's not only going to activate as AF on, it's also going to change your AF area mode to a different option. So bear with me. I'll show you what I mean in 1 second here. Okay, so now I have the D850 plugged in, and I'm going to go to, again, custom setting menu, but we're going to go down to F controls now. By going into F controls, we're going to go to custom control assignment F1. And yep, so you can actually see, I actually have my camera set up similarly to Alex, obviously different buttons. So Alex asked the sub selector button. So he's using, so we have on the majority of our cameras, the Z5, the Z6, the Z7, Z60, Z7 II, D850, D500, D5, D6, that's most of them. We have an AF on button, and then we also have a dedicated joystick control. We call it a sub-selector. So this sub-selector here is how Alex, and I'll go down to it. So you would go down to sub-selector center, because that means you're pushing the sub-selector, which is usually an 8-way joystick control to move your AF point. But you can also have it be selected differently when you push it straight in. So what I want you to do, if you're using one of these cameras, is you go and find AF area mode plus AF on. And from there, you go, I'm going to click now the right on the D-pad, and that's going to bring me into a secondary menu where now I tell the camera what AF mode or AF area mode I want it to change to. So like I said, I could be with my, I could have dedicated my AF on button to be, let's say, 3D autofocus. So that's how I shoot, let's say, most of the time. But I want to be really, really precise on something. Let's say it's a bird in a tree and there's some branches in between. I want to shoot right between those branches and get on the bird's face. Well, I want to be super specific, so I want single point AF. Well, like you just saw in my menu here, I have this sub-selector center set so that I am able to go quickly change with a push of a button into single point AF, and that is still activating my autofocus. Now you can go and change different buttons. So you can also see that I have my preview button and my function 1 button on the front of the camera set up this way as well. So I would normally, let's say, have my preview, so that's the top one, set up for either 9 point or 25, depending on what I think I'll be shooting that day. But this enables you so that in 3 button presses, I have AF on for 3D, I have single point with the sub-selector center button, and then I have my preview button on the front that activates my dynamic 9. So really, really cool functionality that allows you to jump back and forth between these different modes. So yes, Alex, that is how I have my cameras set up when I'm using a D5, D850, D6, or a D500. That being said, I'm mostly shooting mirrorless right now, so I'm not using these cameras as much. But if I was, as you can see with those menus I just showed you, that is how I have my D850 set up. Okay, so for everybody else, let's jump forward a little bit. So these are all the different autofocus points you have for all the different cameras. These are all of the different AF area modes that we have for these different cameras. And you can see that there's a lot of them that line up. So there's single point AF on both, there's dynamic in both, there's, we call them slightly different things, wide area versus group. We have auto area in both. And then we do have a subject tracking functionality, but it's a little bit different than the 3D tracking in DSLRs. Now, I'm not going to go through every single one of these because, to be totally honest, that's an hour and a half long talk just by itself that I'm sure would bore most of you, maybe some of you. So I'm only going to really talk about 2 or 3 of the main ones, and then from there we'll go into questions afterwards. So as I've already said, make sure you throw any questions you have about autofocus, about exposure, about just any cameras that you're curious about. Throw them in the chat. We'll get to it afterwards. But I will go and talk right now about 2 or 3 of my favorite autofocus area modes to use for wildlife and birding. So, single point AF. Now, I will actually say this is not one of my favorites. This is probably my least favorite autofocus mode, whether I'm shooting with mirrorless, whether I'm shooting with DSLR. And the reason for that is not because it's no good. There's a lot of people out there who will go and shoot with single point AF and will get spectacular results, and that's very, very good. But the big thing that I want to point out is that if you, the photographer, miss at all, then the onus is on you. It's your fault that you missed focus. Any of our cameras that are currently out in the field right now, DSLR or mirrorless, if you're using single point AF and you get it on your subject, the camera is going to be able to focus. But when you have a very erratic moving subject, if you have that autofocus point stray just a little bit, if you can't anticipate exactly where your subject matter or where your subject is going to be, then you can run into some problems with which is what you see on the second one on the right there. The camera could and will jump focus to the back if you lose track of the subject. Now, this is not to say you cannot do it. People who've been shooting for years are really, really good at anticipating their subject matter. They maybe have been shooting the same type of bird or sport or deer, whatever it might be, whatever animal, wildlife you're shooting, you anticipate the action. And if you have that anticipation down pat, then you can go and shoot single point all day long and get amazing results. But I would put out there that the majority of people do need and should use get a little bit of help from the actual camera. We have some really, really powerful computing going on within these cameras. I personally will go and use that help most of the time. So for single point AF, that's not what I recommend to most people. If somebody tells me that they're getting 95% keeper rate while using single, that's fantastic. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't change a thing. It's working for you. Stay with it. But for most other people, I would not recommend it because your keeper rate will be considerably lower. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to recommend is dynamic mode, regardless of whether you're in a mirrorless camera or a DSLR. Now, when it comes to dynamic mode between these two different systems, I actually find that there's a bit of a difference. For a DSLR shooter, I love dynamic mode. I don't care what you're shooting, portraiture, dogs, birds in trees, birds in flight, doesn't matter. Dynamic mode works so amazingly well in DSLR. I'm in tune with it. It just works with the way that my brain works. Well, on the Z mirrorless bodies, I actually don't like dynamic AF. Now, that's just my personal opinion. I know people at the office who love dynamic and get great results out of it, but for just the way that I shoot, for whether it's my anticipation, just the way that I shoot, that I kind of look at things, that I maybe compose, personally, I don't like dynamic mode as much on the Z camera. So for a DSLR shooter, I would say absolutely go and use dynamic, regardless of what your subject matter is. For a Z camera, you can go and use it, see if it works for you. But I have a recommendation that I'll probably recommend better than that. Now, what is dynamic area? Because as we go through the different groups, and obviously different cameras have different numbers, so don't really worry about that too much. But basically, the larger the grouping, it's designed for more erratic moving subjects. And what I mean by that is, what is happening is you tell the camera the initial single autofocus point. So if you're in that 25 point where you see the, well, that's from a D500, D850, D5 type of autofocus point where you have the main point and then the little helpers in between. You're telling the camera to use the single point within that little grouping. And then that little grouping will help out if needed. If the camera finds that you're not able to perfectly keep it on your subject all the time, then those surrounding points will help out. I personally would go with one of the smaller dynamic modes. So if you are using a DSLR, I usually like dynamic 9. Dynamic 25 is probably what I'd recommend for most people. It kind of gives you the best balance between giving you the specificity while still giving you the ability to get some help from the camera. So as I mentioned, you tell the camera what that main autofocus point is going to be. So in this case, it's that little albatross's eye. And then if needed, if the camera senses that the bird starts getting up or starts running around, then those other helpers will jump in and activate if needed. Now, what I would recommend if you're on a mirrorless body, though, is actually one of these wide area modes. And it's funny because on a DSLR, I generally didn't like the group area. In certain situations, I found it worked really, really well. But just overall, the way that I shoot, I didn't use group area very much. And what group area does is group area is essentially, as you can see on the left, that's how it looks when you're looking through a DSLR. It's essentially a diamond-shaped pattern of autofocus points. Now, even though there's 4 autofocus points being shown there, the way it works, essentially picture it as one giant autofocus grouping. So that one kind of diamond pattern, if you kind of connected all the dots, is the autofocus point. Now, because we're limited with the in-camera module, the autofocus module that's in DSLRs, we can't really change it around too much. So you're kind of, the reason it looks like a diamond is because we just can't go and make the points look like anything we want. Well, on the Z bodies, that's exactly what we did. It works the exact same way where anything within that grouping, whether it's a diamond or whether it's a square, anything within that grouping of autofocus points, the closest thing to the camera is going to be activated on. Okay, well, that's nice and simple. Basically, whatever's closest in that box is going to be used to lock on focus. So you're not going to have that dreaded jumping to the background, even if there's a tiny little smidge of your subject that is within that autofocus grouping. So for me, on the mirrorless side, this is my go-to. Whenever I'm dealing with moving subject matter, this is kind of what I'm going to go to. And a lot of people say, well, should I go and use wide area small or should I use wide area large? And the answer to that is it depends on how well do you know your subject, how well can you anticipate. The better you can anticipate, the smaller that autofocus mode I would recommend. So if you could really anticipate your subject matter, go and use wide area small. But if you have a very erratic moving subject, I would go and recommend wide area large. So those are kind of the two that I recommend to people when they're dealing with moving subject matter on any of the Z bodies. Whereas with DSLRs, I usually go and recommend any of the dynamic modes. Now I see here that Glenn is saying your D500 is stuck on D9. So I'm curious, Glenn, if you, and I don't know if I doubt you have your D500 there with you, but I'm going to jump in here. So if you go into, and it might be a little bit different on the D500, but if you actually go into the A in the custom setting menu, the autofocus section, and you find limit AF area mode, which in this case it's A9, limit AF area mode, go in and see if all of the rest of these are checked off. Because if all of the rest of these are checked off, that means that you cannot go and access them. That means at some point, whether it's you, whether it was a customer, somebody went and was just kind of playing around and accidentally went and turned all of these off, which means the camera is not going to allow you to access them. So go and check that, Glenn. See if you have that limit AF area mode selection turned off for a lot of those different options. Oh, or sorry, I just I think I was reading that too literally. I just read it again, and you might be meaning, Glenn, that you love D9 so much that your camera stays on that dynamic 9. So if that's the case, then just disregard what I just went through. But maybe somebody else is running into that as well, where you may have just said, oh, accidentally turned off all those different options, and why can't I get into these other ones? Well, that's why. But for people like Glenn, yes, I think I reread that a little bit too literally. But so that's pretty much it, you guys. Okay, yeah. Okay, it is your favorite mode. Sorry about that, Glenn. I read that a little bit wrong. Well, while reading out of the corner of my eye while presenting, I was jumping on there. Yes. So Peter, to be totally honest with you, that is something that people we have brought this up. This has been brought up to us, where you're saying that the only problem you have with the Zeds is that you will sometimes unknowingly knock the autofocus point from where you want it and you can't lock it down. So the only thing that I would recommend, to be totally honest with you, is having, and let me go in here. What I would recommend is that on the Z cameras, you can go in and have the, so we're going to go custom setting menu, F for controls, go down to F3, the OK button. And then what I would do is for shooting mode, I would have it set to reset. Reset means that you're automatically going to center your autofocus point. So if you go and press that autofocus point, or so if you go press the OK button right smack dab in the middle of the D-pad, then your autofocus point, no matter where it is automatically going to be recentered in the screen. Now, that works for me because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the time, especially when I'm dealing with moving subject matter, I am a focused first. How did I say it before? I'm a focus first and compose later shooter. So I keep my autofocus point mainly in the middle. So me being able to hit that OK button and centering it, it works really well. Unfortunately, if you are the type to constantly be moving your autofocus point around, then there's not a lot that I could really recommend, other than, to be totally honest, if you do want a fast way to jump around, you would go and hit the OK button to center your autofocus point. And then depending on how you actually feel and which camera you're using, because Peter, I'm not sure if you're using a Z6 or a Z7. I think in my memory you're using a Z7, but I could be wrong. What you could also do is you could actually go and change your focus points used, the A4 option. And what this enables you to do is it enables you to actually select every other point. Now, yes, that means that you won't be able to really focus on every single area within the frame. You can get pretty darn close. But the main use of this is to be able to, in a much quicker fashion, be able to jump around the frame, move your autofocus point faster around the frame. So if it does, let's say, get knocked to the top left corner, and you usually like it in the top right corner, well, for me, I would hit OK to center, and then boom, boom, boom. And in 3 steps, you're going to be up at the corner if you've gone and selected every other point. So a couple of options. I know the best option would be to go and have a lock. And you're asking if the Z9 will have it. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't have one here with me. Let me just make sure. No, I definitely don't. I wish I did. I think everybody wishes that it was out. But I don't know if it'll have an AF lock button similar to a lot of our DSLRs. I hope so. I would like to think that it might, because that is an option that we have asked for with the current Z6 to Z7 too, but even customers obviously shooting the Z6 and Z7 have brought that up as well. So the Z9 being a flagship mirrorless product, I would hope it does, but we'll have to wait to see when it gets launched. Alrighty, so that's pretty much it, guys, in terms of the seminar itself. So we're at about 2:45, not too bad, Eastern Standard Time. So this actually went longer than I expected, because I was kind of jumping back and forth between some questions you were throwing out there. So I'm actually done here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and once I'm done doing that, we're pretty much going to be fully into the Q&A time. So if anybody has any questions for me or for any of the Vistek people that are online, you can feel free to throw them in the chat. This is kind of your time. Think of it like an AMA, ask me anything type of event where I'm here. I'm ready and willing to answer pretty much any questions that you guys have. So feel free to throw them in the chat. And I'll take a much needed drink while we do that. Now, I'm trying to think back to the last event that we did. I'm trying to think of what I talked about, because I'm just going through my, I'm almost 99% sure that I talked about the different raw options, whether it's 12-bit or 14-bit. My recommendation of obviously 12-bit. I won't go into that unless you guys are curious and there's new viewers here. But I have a lot of recommendations on how to kind of set your camera up, whether it's going and not using the raw large, medium, and small, because while those are beneficial, I usually feel that if you go and shoot 12-bit raw, get rid of the 14 and lossless compressed, you're actually getting down to a really good file size anyways while shooting with the full 45 megapixels. So really, I won't go into that too much, but I am seeing a couple questions. What's your recommendation from Alex for tiny dark subjects against a very bright sky? You just select overexposed by a stop or more. Okay. So Alex, I'll ask another question, Alex, and then you can answer. You can throw that in, and I'll kind of give you more in depth. Are you trying to expose for the sky so that it doesn't overexpose? So that's my question. Are you looking to essentially? Oh, sorry. Okay, so you're caring. Sorry, I should have just read the rest of your question. And you usually overexpose by a stop or more. Okay, so you're looking to expose for the subject and not care about the background at all. Okay, so for me, there's two ways you can do it. The first way is, to be honest, yours. That way is very, very simple. It doesn't take a lot of time or effort. You just expose your comp and then plus 1.5 stops and you're good. So that's a good way of doing it. The other way that you can go and do it, and obviously I don't have the D850 plugged in anymore, but what you're able to do is, if I can find it, here we go. So if you go into the photo shooting menu and you find metering, now obviously you can go and change the metering system in different ways. On most camera, or some of our higher end ones, there's a dedicated button for it. So for the D850, it's on the top left hand of the camera. So you can go and quickly change your metering. One way that you can make sure that you're exactly exposing for the bird itself is to go and change your metering. So generally, matrix metering is how your camera is going to be set up. And with matrix metering, the camera is going to try and limit the amount that sky is going to get blown out. So in that case, it's not going to do what you want, because you, the photographer, know that you want the main exposure of the camera to be based on that small little bird. So in that case, you would then go and shoot. I would recommend, if you want something that's going to be staying there, if you're only shooting, let's say, dark subjects against the bright sky, then you could go and change to center weighted or to spot metering. Spot metering is going to be even more concentrated, and depending on how small your subject is, it's essentially going to be very similar to the size of an autofocus point. So if you want to keep it on for an extended period of time, then I would recommend spot metering. But if you're going to be kind of jumping back and forth, and you don't always want to keep it there, then you can keep it on matrix and just overexpose the way you're going. Now, a third option if you're shooting raw, which I'm pretty sure you are, what you could do is if you wanted to, a lot of people go and do the exposed to the right. So they're going to make sure that nothing in the photo is overexposed. They're actually purposely going to underexpose the bird to make sure that the blue sky is there. And one of the best ways to do that is actually highlight weighted metering. Highlight weighted metering ensures that you're not going to overexpose anything in the frame. This is essentially a built-in exposed to the right mode. And yes, your bird will definitely be underexposed, but if you're shooting raw, and especially on the D850 with the crazy dynamic range you have, you're able to go and bring up the shadows of that bird afterwards. So it kind of depends on what you're looking to do. If it's going to be get it right in camera and don't care about the overexposed sky, or if you want to save that sky and do a little bit more post-processing, then you can go and get away with highlight weighted metering. And Lisa, yeah, so for those on a budget, what would you recommend for either a mirrorless setup or a DSLR for bird photography? So yeah, so Dan's right. Depending on what you're looking for, depending on what your budget is. Now you say for those on a budget, my for those on a budget might be $500. Dan's kind of thinking about the around 1,000 point. You might be saying 1,500 to 2,000, maybe even 3,000 on a budget. So depending on what your budget is, I would say that the first step would be Dan's recommendation of the P1000. That's a good place to start. Now, the only thing I would say, the difference you'll get between a P1000 and moving up to, let's say, a mirrorless system is going to be the speed of the autofocus. Tracking birds in flight, the hybrid AF system that we have in our, let's say our Z50, is going to be much, much faster than what the P1000 is able to do using its pure contrast-based autofocus system. So the P1000 is good. It has an amazingly crazy focal length. It's unbelievable what it can go and zoom to. But the autofocus speed, especially for tracking birds in flight, isn't going to be as good as a Z50. So it kind of depends on what your budget is. So I'll give you three options. The first will be Dan's, which is which would be the P1000. The next options, they're going to be very similar. One is mirrorless, one is DSLR. So the DSLR option, I would say D7500 with probably the AFP 70 to 300 lens. That lens runs for, I don't know what the exact price is on it right now, but we have a full frame version and a crop sensor version. If you get the crop sensor version, you're looking at well under $1,000. I want to say about $500. So D7500 with the AFP 70 to 300. And then the mirrorless option would be the Z50 and either the Z50 55. Oh man, my brain is going on me. The 50 to 250. That would be the zoom lens that I would recommend. If you do need even more, the AFP 70 to 300 works as well, but you would have to get the adapter. So those are your two relative options, both getting out to about 300 millimeters. If you need more than 300 millimeters, then the price is going to get higher and the weight is going to get much higher as well. But if you need more than 300, I would really recommend the 200 to 500, even though price-wise it sounds expensive at about $1,800. For the quality and for the focal length, that is just unheard of, having it be that cheap with that amazing quality. So once you get beyond 300 millimeters, the price and the size goes up considerably. So if you are looking to be around, perfect. Thanks, Mark. $600 for the AFP 70 to 300. Thank you. So yeah, so that's going to be my recommendation. The AFP 70 to 300 for the, there we go. Okay, I knew it was around 500. 470 for the DX version. So my next comment to you then would be, Lisa, if you are thinking about going full frame in the future, so this is the big choice a lot of people have to make when you're buying lenses, especially when it's for a DX body. Yes, we have dedicated DX lenses, but If you are already telling yourself, okay, I'm buying this because I'm on budget now, I'm buying that, let's say, D7500 because I'm on a budget. Well, if you know that in a couple years you're looking at buying a D850, or you're going to go nuts and you're going to buy yourself a D6, whatever the case may be, if you're thinking about going full frame in the future, as you can see, there's not a huge price difference. We're talking 470 versus 600. I would maybe recommend the $600 full frame AFP 70 to 300 lens versus the $470 AFP DX lens. Do you kind of, I hope that makes sense. So you have the DX only version and then the full frame version. If you're only thinking about sticking crop sensor for the near future, go and stick with the DX. But if you are thinking about going full frame, you can buy a DX body now, but buy full frame lenses now so that those lenses you buy now can still be used in the future with whatever full frame body you purchase. I hope that made sense. Okay, so Mark, I think you've already probably been answered by this, but exposed to the right is what I was using in the situation that Alex is asking about. I've even tested the clipping on my sensor, so I know exactly how much exposure I can give the sky and save details. Yes. Oh, okay. So no, Mark, you're just saying that you're that's how you shoot it. Perfect. So yeah, there's different ways to shoot depending on what your desired outcome is, and your level of post-processing of what you're comfortable with, of what you want to give time-wise. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. With a D850, oh man, that dynamic range, you have a lot of freedom there to go and play afterwards. Oh, thanks all the Vistek guys for all those great, all the great pricing you're throwing in there. That's awesome. Peter, you're ordering 7 Z9s? Awesome. Yeah, Michael. So the 200 to 500, that to me, honestly, is one of the best ultra zoom DSLR or mirrorless lenses that is on the market right now in terms of price, in terms of image quality. I went to Africa about, oh man, it's about 4 years ago now, and I obviously have the ability to go and use our 180 to 400, our 600 mil, our 800 mil primes, the really crazy exotic ones that are $18,000-$20,000. I chose not to bring any of that. I brought a 200 to 500 with me because it's way smaller than the other ones. Obviously, when you're purchasing it, it's way cheaper as well. So when you take those two factors into consideration, and then you look at the quality, and I'm talking the sharpness, I'm talking the level of aberrations, the sharpness is really high and the aberrations level is really low. So when you kind of factor all that in, that 200 to 500 is just absolutely spectacular. The only lens that I like better than the 200 to 500, if I know that I'm always going to be pushing the focal length to the max at 500, is the 500 mil PF. So I'm just going to quickly reach over. I'm going to reach over here and grab it. So this is a 500 millimeter lens that I'm holding in one hand and 2 fingers. So this 500 millimeter f 5.6 PF is just crazy. I've taken this on a trip with me that I didn't know if I would need a 500 mil lens, but I brought it because it fits in my bag. Like, when can you say that about a 500? Oh yeah, I brought it on the off chance that I would need a 500 mil lens. No, you bring a lens like this if you know for a fact that you're going to need it, because it's going to weigh you down. This, I was taking it on 3-4 hour hikes on that trip and having no issue with it whatsoever. So as a birder, as somebody who's, let's say, always needing the extreme end of a lens, that's when the 500 mil really comes into its own. If I was going to Africa again tomorrow, I would probably still bring the 200 to 500 because that versatility makes itself really useful. You never know in those type of situations how close that animal might get. So the versatility of a zoom for me outweighs the size of this. But for certain uses, when I'm shooting particular sports, when I'm doing birding, this guaranteed is what lives in my bag. Oh, yes. Yeah. guys, the 51.2 that they're talking about, this 51.2 is spectacular. I don't think that there is a Z lens that I don't like. They're just all absolutely incredible. The sharpness levels that we're able to achieve out of our Z lenses because of the new mount, it blows me away. Honestly, every time I pick up a Z system and I shoot, whether it's a portrait, whether it's a landscape, whether it's telephoto, it doesn't matter. I'm blown away at the quality of these Z lenses. There doesn't seem to be a trade-off anymore. There was usually having to be a trade-off of, okay, well, do I want to go and set my aperture to be ultra sharp? Well, I'm gonna have to stop down. Or do I want to go and get that really creamy bokeh? Well, I'll have to shoot wide open. And you know that you're not going to get everything at once. These lenses, especially this 51.2, they are just out of this world as they're talking about in the chat there. So yeah, so Mark, our old AIS 51.2 was good, but this new Z 1.2 is on a different level. It honestly is. Shooting wide open, it's crazy. Like, I've shot with other brands 1.2s, and you generally don't want to even shoot wide open unless you want that particular look. But it's not as sharp as you would necessarily want. This, I literally could only have 1.2 as an option with this lens, and it is just absolutely spectacular. I'm blown away every time I pick it up, how good the portraits are. It's made me fall in love with the 50 mil again, that focal length. I was kind of, didn't really love it a lot before, but it is just, oh my God, amazing. So Mark, you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all the Z lenses are being designed for sensors in the 100 megapixel range. I've never heard us talk about specific megapixel ranges that they're actually designed for. All I know is that all of our Z lenses are heavily, because there used to be talk when we got into like the D800 with 36 megapixels, the D850 at 45 megapixels. A lot of people talking about, well, what's out resolving what? Is the sensor out resolving the lenses? Is the lenses out resolving the sensor? And I can tell you across the board, our Z lenses are out resolving any sensor that we currently have on the market. And I bet it'll be like that for a number of years. We didn't design these lenses with sensors that we currently have out. We weren't saying, okay, well, we're going to have a Z7. Let's make sure it only is good for 45 megapixels. They know that we're going to be pushing the boundary of megapixel count at some point in the future. Is it 3 years? Is it 10 years? Who knows? But we know that that's where it's going. So yeah, we definitely dialed in with these lenses and made sure that they are just absolutely spectacular and will be for a number of years. Alrighty, so guys, we're at about the hour mark. There's tons of questions, and yeah, everybody seems to be loving that 200 to 500. Whether it's Michael, whether it's Glenn, yeah, it is just such a good quality lens for the price that you're paying. But yeah, I think we're going to start wrapping this up. So I'll kind of slowly be wrapping it up over the next minute or two, just to make sure that if there are any last questions that we go and kind of give you time to throw them in the chat. But I want to say, guys, thanks very much for joining in. And as I did mention halfway through the little seminar I gave, if anybody's looking to buy any Nikon gear, we have a bunch of it on sale. Vistek has some great savings right now, so make sure you go check out their website. Talk to any of the amazing reps who were online with us today, and go and see if there's anything that kind of catches your eye, whether it's the 500 mil PF. I think that one's about $300-400 off. So that's about $4,500 now, $4,600. So that's on sale. All of the Z bodies, as I mentioned before, are on sale. The D850's on $500 off. The D780's on sale. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on sale. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. So if you're curious, go and check out their website. And it doesn't look like there's any other questions coming in. So What I will say is, everybody, thank you very, very much for joining us today on this beautiful Thursday afternoon. Well, it's beautiful here. I was just outside before and it was about 20 degrees. So absolutely beautiful. I hope that the rain is going to hold off on the weekend. Um, and yeah, thanks you guys. Peter, great. I know, Peter, your level of knowledge is really, really high as it is. So the fact that you were able to hopefully get a few little piece of info, that you liked it, it was good. Penn, I'm really glad that you learned a few points, and that's kind of what these type of events are. These type of events, and we're going to hold them more with Vistek in the future, is not to go and really kind of just tell you every single spec on, let's say, a Z6 II or a Z7 II. This is really to kind of open up with you guys and get into kind of the nitty gritty stuff. If we were able to go and have, let's say, a demo day at a Vistek store, I would be there at the counter with Nathan, and you guys would just kind of come up and ask random questions. Well, that's what today's about, and that's what the virtual demo days are designed for. They're designed to go and get you guys those kind of nuggets of information, the Easter eggs that you normally wouldn't hear from just a regular informational session. So hopefully, from the looks of it, you guys. Oh, yeah, Amanda, I'm sorry for saying that it's over 20 degrees here. I know you guys just got some snow yesterday, so I do apologize for that. But yeah, hopefully you guys really enjoy these type of events. Make sure you let your Vistek rep know. Let them know if you do enjoy them. If there's anything you want to know about in the future, we can go and do kind of this kind of hybrid approach where I do a seminar on a topic and then we go and open it up afterwards. So go and tell your Vistek rep if there's anything you want to learn about. Any of the Vistek reps, heck, if you guys want to go and learn anything, if you guys want me to teach a topic on a very particular subject, you guys can go and contact me directly. Most of you should already have my email. But yeah, go and tell your Vistek rep if there's anything you guys want to learn about. That's what we're doing this for. We're doing this for you, for the consumers, to kind of have that level of engagement with you. Alrighty, well, other than saying sorry to Amanda for your freezing cold weather that you're having to deal with out there, even though it's mid-May, I will say thank you all for joining us today on this Thursday afternoon. And until the next event, keep yourself nice and safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.